For the premiere episode of Season 2, I'm speaking with Penn Parrish and Detective Joe Scaramucci of the McLennan County Sheriff's Office. This is a sobering look into the world of child sexual abuse, human trafficking, sexual slavery, vigilantes, how the law is failing victims, how big tech plays a role, and more. While not a fun journey down the rabbit hole, it's an important topic. So please buckle up for my chat with Penn Parrish and Joe Scaramucci. Hello and welcome to the RSnake Show. This is Season 2, Episode 1, and we have a couple of great guests with us today. But before we do that, just a little bit of house cleaning. We are in a new studio, you might notice, for those of you who've been watching the show up to this point. So there's a couple of unknowns, and we're going to play with this and see and make sure it all works. But it basically gives us a little bit more control over production, and that's kind of why this whole thing started in the first place. Just try to make sure we have as many conversations with interesting people as we can on our own schedule. Still have a great relationship with the IBLE team. We're just moved into our own space. So today I have with us Penn Parrish and Joe Scaramucci. How are you, sir?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah, good. So we're going to be talking today about child prostitution, sex trafficking, sort of that whole genre, which is just a ball of laughs. I'm sure you guys agree. It's a pretty disgusting topic, but I think it's an important one because I didn't really realize until fairly recently how pervasive it actually was. And I should know this because I'll get to why I have a little bit of bona fides in this arena as well at some point. But before we go down that path, Penn, you're just about finished with a new book. Is that correct?
Yeah, my fourth book, it's called Can You See Me? It chronicles the life of an 11-year-old girl who was unfortunately orphaned when cartels took her mother out. Mm-hmm. And it chronicles her being trafficked by her own family and being trained to traffic in Mexico and then shipped off to the United States. And it chronicles her and her friends, and these are true life stories. I spent a lot of time interviewing young ladies who were victims of trafficking, and so these are real life stories. And I started out, Robert, to write it as a work of nonfiction. And it was
I thought
terribly. It was terribly dry, and my publisher suggested, "Look, it'll sound a lot better if you can make it a work of nonfiction, but use the truth in it." So that's what I've done, mm-hmm. And we're looking forward to having that out in the next 30 days.
And how did you get involved in that? How did you decide to go down that path? I mean, how does your background lend to that?
Yeah, I had. Been involved through family members who are active in the law enforcement arena, but I have also done work with the Border Patrol, made very aware of that, and recently in the last couple of years have become very good friends with Andrea Sparks, who's the former head of child sex trafficking for the state of Texas, the governor's office. And through Andrea, I got involved in 3 different national charities that are raising money and do great things for victims of human trafficking. The one that's nearest and dearest to my heart is Nicole's Place, mm-hmm. here in Austin. It is Austin 20 is the group, and I am on the board. Proud to say we raise money to provide shelters for these victims, and it's just a wonderful thing that they do. The second charity is Collective Liberty, which Joe is very familiar with, all of these charities, actually, mm-hmm. And that's out of D.C. I am an advisor to them, and they use technologies to develop means for aiding law enforcement for trafficking checking where they could find these traffickers. Mm-hmm. And then the other is the Lighthouse, and it's an Austin-based charity. And actually, the company that I work with, Valkyrie Intelligence, has done some artificial intelligence for them that's proven very, very helpful. Mm-hmm. So along the way, I met this incredible gentleman who will.
Yeah, let's do your little bio here. Joe, you're a pretty interesting guy. You're a detective. Yeah. Could you give me a little bit of background on what you're doing these days?
Yeah, so I'm a detective with the Sheriff's Office in Waco, Texas, McLennan County. I'm also assigned as a task force officer with Homeland Security Investigations out of Austin. I've been policing about 18 years. I've been in the anti-trafficking movement since 2014. Kind of stumbled into it. Didn't really intend on doing this at all. I actually, to be honest, was one of those people that just assumed it happened south of the border and had nothing to do with anything that we were doing here.
How wrong were you?
Oh God! If I knew then, I remember complaining about having to take a training on it. Why am I having to take this? This is crazy. Prior to that, I did death investigations, sex investigations. So for about 7 years, I did those types of investigations. Over the years, it just led to more and more exposure for our department and our methods and methodologies for really how we're targeting traffickers. And I get to, pretty blessed. I get to work a lot, Department of Justice, many of the federally funded task forces. I get to support their training and technical assistance. Some international work as well. Just got back from Poland and Ukraine, so heading back over there here in a couple weeks. So.
Better bring your flak jacket.
yeah, no kidding. It's really interesting going into a war zone with nothing but a shirt and a coat.
I bet. So we probably need to define a couple of words, like CSAM, for instance, just so that we're talking about the same thing at the same time. The audience may not be as versed in this as you guys are. Can you please kind of explain what the different sort of how you divide these things out and how you think about them?
There's you brought up CSAM as an example, commonly referred to as child pornography. There's been a very big push to get away from that and use child sexual abuse material because that's what it is, right? So really just calling things what they are. There's no such thing as child pornography. Pornography is generally viewed as something that's consensual. It's I don't want to say a good thing because it's not, but it's something people view as a pleasurable thing. Well, this is a child. It's not pleasurable. Mm-hmm. So really calling it child sexual abuse material. One of the ones that really bothers me a lot is a John. When we talk about sex buyers, my son's name is John. That's not the same.
Sure.
Again, call it what it is. It's a person who pays for sex. Mm-hmm. Even, using the terms prostitute. I absolutely hate that word. I don't think that there's just so much negativity that comes with it. And we view, in many ways, trafficking victims as prostitutes. And prostitutes as trafficking victims, and they're not interchangeable. So
what about adult sexual abuse material? Because there are adults that are trafficked as well. It's not only children.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So is there a term for that? Did I just name it?
Yeah, you just named it.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay,
I'm gonna leave here and put it out on LinkedIn.
Yeah, we call them sex workers.
Okay, but not necessarily consensual in this case.
Some do, some not.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I like to refer to people like that as person involved in commercial sex. Mm-hmm. We don't know what circumstances going on.
What their motive is.
Yeah, no idea. Like Penn said, there are some people that are consensual. I would argue that it's extremely, extremely limited. Just because we can say they're making a choice, but if you only have 2 or 3 choices,
sure.
Are you really making a choice? But yeah, I think words matter. Words are important.
Of course they are.
So how does this whole thing work? Because there seems like there's a bit of an economy, or maybe even a massive economy around there. What's sort of how does that work? Who gets paid? Who's getting paid off to make sure this all works the way it should work?
Ultimately at the end of the day, it's traffickers. That's really it.
How does someone wake up one day and get into trafficking? Like how does that occur?
It's $1 million question. I think if we knew, we could head it off. I think economic instability for one. Most Harvard graduates aren't going out and trafficking people. It happens. Don't get me wrong. But you look at that. You look at culture, pop culture. We think about I could say the word pimp, and I could say the word trafficker. If I say pimp, everybody thinks about just Snoop Dogg and nice cars and jewelry and all this, and it's somewhat viewed as glamorous. If I say trafficker, people genuinely have a very different view of that, but they're the same thing, right? So who at the end of the day is ultimately making the money? It's traffickers. Are some hotel owners probably paid off here and there from time to time? Of course, depending on what country you're in or what location you're in. Is it possible law enforcement's paid off? It is. It
Strip
happens.
clubs. You can go, the list goes on and on. The surprising amount of places that you find these traffickers will overwhelm you. It's not limited to the cartels, who are bad guys, of course, but there are people that build industries off of this, and they get very rich off of these. These pimps survive by having multiple girls on the street and coming back to them with cash.
So what does that end up looking like? What's the sort of the demographic breakdown? Is it mostly people out of their homes, or is it mostly cartel? Like what is the breakdown of where the biggest problems lie? If you had to tackle just like one of those issues.
Domestic.
Domestic.
There's a huge misconception about cartel trafficking, gang-related trafficking. For the most part, they're not trafficking, right? What's the purpose of a cartel? Is to essentially make money to the top. If you're a trafficker, what do you want? You want money, right? So a lot of times I like to say it's not necessarily that the Crips are trafficking, it's that a Crip is trafficking. Or kind of look at it that way. If I had to tackle one particular form, it would be the hotel-based nomadic pimp with 3 girls. That is, in terms of sex trafficking, the biggest issue that we come across.
Really?
Is just the one-off trafficker with 2-3 girls.
And where did they find those girls typically?
Oh, I mean, generally on the internet, so the biggest place for recruitment and grooming is still Facebook, Instagram, anywhere that somebody could drop into that DM and show their flashy pictures and tell somebody they're pretty is where you're going to find it.
So that's not just those 2 platforms. You're really talking about anything that some child might be on is a potential place.
Yeah, any platform that a child or adult is on. If it has a chat communication on it, they will exploit it.
So I obviously am a security expert, so I know quite a bit about these issues, but shouldn't it be impossible for children to be on these platforms in the first place? For instance, Facebook has a minimum of 15, I think. Shouldn't that be the thing that stops that from occurring, at least for anybody under 15?
Should be.
What's happening? What's the actual reality?
The actual reality is I left a classroom full of 7-year-olds and asked them today, how many of you have Facebook or Instagram? And probably 3/4 of them raised their hand.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's wild. And, should they be under the age of 15? You can change the settings on there, create accounts where they can't be found by adults. They're getting found by adults that are also having accounts that look like they're 12 and 13 years old. So it's tough. I mean,
you have to fault the parents who are not watching what their underage children are doing.
What about the social media platforms? Do you feel like there's any fault to be had there? Do you think they should be doing more interrogation on who they let on the platform?
This is a dicey one.
I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, for me, I in many ways defend Facebook. So you look at over the last couple of years, we'll say 2 years ago, there was 21 million cyber tips to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. 21 million. 20.3 million of those came from Facebook, right? So is Facebook doing a good job? Clearly they are. The problem is in my opinion, you can go out and ask all these, soccer moms, hey, what do you think? And they'll tell you, well, they should be going through and monitoring the communication, all the discussion that's going on Facebook. But I want my privacy. Well, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Do you want them involved in the DMs or do you not want them involved in the DMs? It's that simple. It's tough. When you're the number one organization submitting cyber tips by 99%, 99 point some odd percent, kind of looks like you're doing a good job.
So I'll get back to Facebook in a while. I think they're a big ball of wax that we should probably dig into a little bit more,
and others,
and many others. It's not just them. And I agree that they are doing something.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. I wouldn't necessarily say a good job, but they're doing something, and we can applaud that. But let's talk about the demographics of the people who are getting trafficked. Like, what does that typically look like these days? Like, what's the average person who finds themselves in this situation? What's their background? How old? What sex, etc.?
Yeah, so if you're looking at sex trafficking, primarily female. Males get trafficked, trans get trafficked. You know, there's no...
What rate is it, male to female?
There's really no way to determine that, right? If anybody's throwing out statistics at you when it comes to anti-trafficking, they're wrong, period.
They just don't know.
They just don't know. How do we get these numbers? You know, there's no way to quantify something that's hidden. We can have an idea based on certain things, but if we look at self-reported numbers to the National Human Trafficking Hotline, they'll tell you that about 16% of certain years, people that called in as victims, self-identifying, identified as male. You can look at different organizations that'll say it's predominantly 96% female, you see very often. And there's a few reasons I think why those numbers are off. For one, when law enforcement's doing operations, what are we targeting? We're targeting females. I just talked with a police department in Texas, and they couldn't figure out why they couldn't find males. And I'm like, you're not doing operations in the area where these males are. Generally, you're targeting the area where these females are.
Because there's not a lot of boys at the strip club, is what you're saying.
No, yeah, of course.
I mean, is that sort of the genre you mean?
Yeah, you know, there's still tracks. There's still places where women walk up and down the street and cars are pulling up, and those are all women. You know, you'd be hard pressed to find a male out there. So if we're not going where the males are, we're never going to find the males.
Sure.
The males are more clandestine with their activities.
Very much.
Interesting. How so? What do they end up? What does that look like?
It's more of a private network that deal in that. The horrid people like NAMBLA and those type of people that deal in that. The certain bars that cater to them, you'll find trafficking there.
Interesting. What's your feeling on NAMBLA? I mean, you gotta have a strong.
Is that strong which one is that?
National Man Boy Love Association.
Yeah, absolutely not. No, absolutely not.
Horrific.
You know, absolutely not.
You have no feelings on it?
Oh, I have feelings.
A lot of feelings.
No, I have a lot of feelings. I think that when we start making something acceptable, we're really doing a disservice to people. That I can't even believe that's an organization.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
It's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
You just thought every one of them would have been raided by now, but apparently just somehow survives.
When you talked about age groups, it ranges. There's a wide variety, and I'll give you a specific example. One example of a young lady that I spent quite a bit of time with. She was incarcerated at the first when I first met her. At the age of 11, she was living in South Texas, and her mother used her to sex trafficked her own daughter to get drugs, and kept her into that until the mother was put in jail, and the sex trafficked daughter, became property of somebody else, and that was a pimp, and that pimp just kept engaging her, and she had suffered many arrests, but kept getting released and back into the same old pattern. She when I met her, she decided that she was tired of the life and she was going to get out of it and go on. And when she got out, I was there to help her. Andrea was there to help her. And we got her on her feet, got her a job, got her started, and she fell right back into it. It's just a habit that they get into. They get attracted to money. As thin as it is, these pimps don't give these girls much to keep them under control. They give them drugs to keep them under control. But Joe, you may have a little bit to add to that, but that's pretty bad when you get trafficked at 11 years old. That's a scar you can never get rid of.
Yeah, it's interesting. You can talk to most trafficking survivors and go right down the list. I mean, you go right down the checklist. If it's not prior trafficking, it's child sexual abuse. There's a lot of discussion on what is the demographic. A lot of people will tell you that, average age of entry is 12 to 14 years old. We need to look for, Go to Google, type human trafficking, click images. You're going to scroll down quite a bit before you see a woman of color. Who's being trafficked the most? Women of color. There was a study.
Why is that? I mean, why is that such a disparity between what's reported and what's real?
Yeah, well, I mean, look at the socioeconomic instability. Just
by
everything.
virtue of them being poor, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, what is your vulnerability that led to the trafficking? Right. Again, there are not many Harvard graduates are being trafficked. Mm-hmm. So look at what's going on in the communities. Kids that come from impoverished families are vulnerable just because of the financial disparity. So, there's so many systemic issues that really lead to the trafficking to begin with. But even looking at that, the majority of people that are being trafficked are not actually children. We talk about children the most,
sure,
but average age of entry that's been self-reported is 18 to 19 years old. What's happening there? You're generally coming out of your household. If you don't have, a solid, stable background, and you don't have the ability to go to college, or, and somebody comes along and is telling you how pretty you are, and you don't have any money, and then shows you all the things that they have.
It's attractive. They get attracted. And they'll go work in the strip clubs. Mm-hmm. And then when they're not in the strip clubs, they're outperforming for their pimps.
And it's just a cycle at that point.
Now, horrible cycle.
And now their children are in a similar situation. And
you look at them, and you look at how many victims of trafficking are criminalized by law enforcement. They're arrested predominantly for prostitution, which I get and is just absolutely absurd to me. So what I try telling cops is you're literally creating more instability for them to be the victim of human trafficking. So you take a woman, say she's been arrested 3 times in the state of Texas. She's now a felon. And she's making $2,000 to $3,000 a day, turning, maybe 10 dates. And you get her out of it. What's she going to do at that point? Right. So you go,
especially with an arrest record a mile long.
Yeah. So you get her and you get her a job at Flying J truck stop. She's making $10 an hour being screamed at by a boss. Why am I going to make $10 an hour? 15, $20 an hour. I can go make $20 in
she can turn at that same truck stop. She can turn into a lot loser and make a lot of money.
Got it. So what about the kidnapping aspect? Because not all of this is, just someone who's impoverished looking for a way out. A lot of this, or not necessarily a lot, but some, at minimum, is someone being actually taken from the street or taken from someone's home or being sold out from underneath a family.
It's
how common is that?
What's the terminology? Statistically it's
very small.
It's very small. I've identified more than 270 victims at this point of human trafficking. I've only ever had one that was even near kidnapping. In the United States, it's not very common. It is.
You see it in Nigeria. You see it in Southeast Asia. You see it in other African communities, and in the some of the Slavic states. It's pretty predominant. Bulgaria is horrible.
So in that case, what we're actually seeing is not so much selling the children, but just grooming them within the families.
Just grooming, yeah.
So some adult, typically male, will start abusing either their kids or their nephews or daughters or whatever, right? Is that the idea?
I mean, if it's familial trafficking, yes. If it's not, it's somebody who's smooth with their mouth. That's all it is, and they're telling them, hey, if you're having sex anyway, might as well make some money off of it. If you're going to be doing this, you might as well be making $300 an hour doing it. $300 an hour is a lot of money. I've never made that. Well, not, for the most part. but I mean, that's a lot of money. Now you take the fact that this person's had 10 years of child sexual abuse history where they didn't have the ability to make that choice, and now they feel that they have a choice. It's hard.
So is that really a choice, or are they actually in such a place where if they tried to leave, they would be endangering their lives?
Oh, absolutely. In many, many cases, yes. But there's also, you have to remember, it's a psychological game. We talk about Stockholm Syndrome. I don't necessarily think that has a ton to do with trafficking, but learned helplessness. Mm-hmm. You've been taught to be helpless. You've been taught to not be able to make these decisions. And a lot of times traffickers will say you can leave, but you leave with what you came with. Which is nothing, and that may, like Penn said, it may last. It's a very brief period.
And a lot of them are kept under the influence of narcotics.
And that's a way to exert a tremendous amount of control.
Without question.
Yeah, I've never had the misfortune to have to come off of heroin, but I've seen what it does to people. And you keep somebody sick if they don't turn a trick. It's a hell of a way to do it, you know?
And where else are they going to get that kind of money?
Right.
Yeah. It's sadistic, but it's a very good control mechanism.
All right, so let's talk about the people actually doing the pimps themselves, the traffickers themselves. So is there like a obvious signal that you're like, okay, this is somebody who's involved in this? Is there, can I go to a hotel and see someone with 3 girls in tow and say that's probably what's going on? Like what are some of the obvious clues that somebody just kind of going through their life might be able to help you identify this kind of stuff?
Yeah, for me, if I was to pull in a parking lot, it would depend on the hotel, right? So we were actually talking yesterday. If I pull into a Motel 6 going for, an undercover on a date with what we believe is a trafficking victim, and there's a Lexus sitting in the parking lot, people with a brand new Lexus generally have the money to be able to stay at a Hilton, right? We're not going to stay at a Motel 6. So things like that are really obvious. Not saying that everybody that drives a Lexus at a Motel 6 is trafficking, but when I see somebody just sitting in the car for extended periods of time, it's because they're looking out for the cops or there's a date in the room. So for me, it would just be really kind of the situational awareness. What makes sense? And it doesn't make sense for somebody to just sit idle in a car, especially a high-end car, at an economy rate hotel.
Sure.
They're not, for the most part, the description that you get from watching movies. Guys with the fedoras, with the feather, and the bright red suits,
Sure.
and no, they're guys that look like you and me, and sit in like you said, sit in the car waiting for their trick to be done. Move on to the next. The same with the fellows that work the truck stops that have their 2 or 3 women in a van, and they're working signals from truckers that know that they're looking for a trick, and they sit and wait in the van and put the 3 or 4 girls to work in the trucks, and that's how it goes.
What about the demographics of people molesting their own children? Is there a way to sort of obviously see that from a distance? Is that sort of, because that seems like so hidden to me. I mean, you're so now embedded in people's lives. That would be a very difficult thing to identify.
Yeah, familial trafficking is extremely difficult. You really can't do it without an outcry from the victim or sometimes you'll find where a buyer has remorse.
Really?
Yeah, and he'll come forward and say, hey.
Somehow very surprising to me.
Yeah, you'll find that every now and then, but it's not very often.
Why does that happen? Is that like a call to religion, or is that...
I think at the end of the day, there's more good people in the world than bad, right? And I don't know how to word it.
Especially a guy that has a conscience that's just turned a trick with a girl that is obviously 13 or 14, and he walks out of there feeling guilty as hell and goes, "What have I done?"
Yeah,
interesting. That's still very surprising to me because you're basically admitting to a crime at that point, and that could be serious consequences.
Joe can address this, but that happens so much at massage parlors. Joe busts a lot of massage parlors.
Interesting.
Yeah, massage parlors are kind of my...
That's your specialty.
Forte, yeah.
Be careful who you say that to.
Yeah, no, I've been fortunate enough to work those all over the country, Asian countries, European countries, and they're all the same. They're all the exact same. And one of the things that's interesting with that, with massage parlor trafficking, is I think that because they're out of sight, we tend to look at the victims different, right? We don't see them in front of us on the street. Usually when one gets busted, especially, where I'm at, when one gets shut down, you'll have people come forward. Hey, I was in there.
Really? Why?
Because they know we're coming.
What is
interesting? So it's a plea deal at that point from their perspective.
I think it's
a preemptive plea deal.
I think it's one of those, if I come to you first, things won't be as bad. Because we will go find them. I mean, I literally sat with an agency some other state the other day. I don't remember where I was. And we were thumbing through the receipts from the credit cards. Like, go talk to each one of these people.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That story you told me some time ago about the Waco massage parlor where you guys staked it out forever. That's a good example.
Well, we got lucky on one. It was really interesting. It was two that were connected by an owner. And the date we ran the search warrants, my partner at the time came in with an alarm clock. He said, "I think it's a camera." Why do you think it's a camera? He said, "Well, it's got a SD card in the back." So, FBI calls that a clue.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when we started, conducting the search warrants and actually going through those, we were able to identify 405 individual people. Now, these clocks were in the rooms, so every sex act was on tape. It was really interesting. Yeah, we charged a lot of buyers, and as word got out, then people started panicking because they knew we were coming if we could identify you. So we were having preachers come forward. We arrested law enforcement. We arrested millionaires, you name it. Everybody went to jail as a result of this. And it was interesting because it gave us...
And what were these clocks for? Why did they put them in there?
I think the owner did it to make sure she was never getting cheated on the money. I think it was a means to monitor what was happening.
Not future blackmail
She
material?
caught herself.
I don't think so. Yeah, she caught herself. And it was good because you could see her switching out girls, the whole 9 yards. One thing that was interesting to me in a very negative way is the amount of forcible rapes that I watched actually occur on tape. I'm talking women being picked up, thrown over beds, fought, the whole 9 yards. And we typically don't see that, when we talk about IMB, illicit massage business trafficking, because we think about who's the clientele there. Mm-hmm. Generally speaking, middle-aged white dudes wearing wedding rings and with good careers. So we don't really consider that, and it's an extremely violent setting.
I heard one stat, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I'd love to get your take on it, that approximately 5% of all people in the United States trade or could be going to jail for CSAM material. Does that sound right to you?
I've never heard that. I don't know where that would come from. I don't know how you could measure that.
It was a back of the napkin rough estimate, but
yeah.
What would you put the number at if you had to throw a wild guess out there?
I couldn't even.
Yeah, it's too hard to tell.
I don't know
because if it is that high, and I'm not saying it is,
it's massive.
That means that by the time I'm done with season 2, at least one of those people could theoretically be arrested.
Yeah, I don't think that's accurate. I think it could be if you really start breaking, and this is where we start splitting hairs, right? You have 18-year-old boy, 17 pictures of his 17-year-old girlfriend. Mm-hmm. Is that child sexual abuse material? It is.
It is, yes.
Right? So should we include him in that statistic?
I think the answer is yes, because it's completely illegal, but
many states also have the 3-year rule where it's actually not. So how do we...
The Romeo and Juliet
laws, right? Similar to sexual assault, sexual abuse that we know. I don't believe you could put 100 people in a room and 5 of them have child sexual abuse material.
Okay.
I don't
so
think
you think
it's
it's
that.
less than that?
I think it's less.
Okay.
Now, the state attorney general's office could probably give you pretty good statistics on that.
I'd be curious. Because if it is that high, that means we're fighting a fighting force of people who are not particularly well networked currently, but easily could figure out ways to start networking and have political laws, put laws in place like those Romeo and Juliet laws, or
absolutely
change the age of consent to 15 in Hawaii or whatever, right? I mean, there's all these examples where there's kind of like, why does that law even exist?
So yeah, when you look at a lot of laws, people oftentimes ask like, why did this law not pass? And I hate to be this way, but it spade's a spade. Always ask who pays for sex. Generally, and it really depends on what kind of trafficking you're talking about. Why do bills get shot down when it comes to illicit massage trafficking? Like I said, who's primarily in there? Middle-aged white men. Who's lawmakers?
All right, not to throw too much of a conspiracy theory out here, but I met Ken Paxton one time through Penn, actually, and he was talking about all the things he had done for Texas, and it was kind of a fundraiser thing. But one of the things that kind of blew my mind, he was talking about he wanted to basically have the ability to go run any case he wanted in the state of Texas. Just go pick his case. And it didn't. Not only did it not go through, but he got massive backlash from the other AGs. Yeah, all the DA offices. And I had to ask him, like, that first of all, that just, I don't understand why they'd care. Maybe for the political aspect, like, we don't want you going on a political witch hunt. But you could have easily just horse traded and say, well, not that, but if you want to go after child prostitution issues, fine. If you want to go after, some sort of, sex trafficking, whatever, those are on the table. You can go after those, or drugs, let's say. You can go after those, but just no political witch hunts.
The amazing thing in the state of Texas is that county DAs wield unbelievable power, and there is very, very little oversight on them. The only way a DA can be removed is by the legislature.
But so again, not to throw too much of conspiracy theory out there, and some other people I've talked to in three-letter agencies firmly disregard this as even a possibility. But I think it's weird that they didn't just come back with, if you want to go after child, sex abuse issues, fine. Everything else is not allowed. They didn't do that. They just said no. Mm-hmm. Why would they say no?
There's obviously some
purely just, protecting my little part of the world, or is there something?
Yeah, I don't think they should have the ability to do that. You can go look at the statistics for the Attorney General's office for their human trafficking unit. How many convictions have they secured in the last couple of years? 4. Yeah. 2 traffickers were given deferred adjudication by our Attorney General's office. Deferred adjudication. When that probation's completed, it's not even on the record. That's not a conviction, in my opinion.
Wow.
So are they equipped to do that? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. There's some wonderful men and women that work there. I'm not by any stretch saying that they're not fully capable.
Sure.
But I also think that once you do that, you take away from your local district attorney.
So you think the DA should have that power and them alone?
I think the DAs should have the ability to prosecute within the county that they're, or counties that their network, or that their circuit is. Because what you would inevitably end up happening, and I was very vocal and loud about the inability to, or not letting them do that, is then you have people who can cherry pick cases. Well, this one's difficult. You keep dealing with it. This one's a cooperative 15-year-old girl. It's really good. It's going to look really good for us. Mm-hmm. Now I have the ability to cherry pick it. Mm. We can't have that.
I like the idea of always having a backup, so let's say the local DA isn't doing their job. At least someone can go in and say, look, this is just getting out of hand at the border, let's say, or in this certain region in Austin or one of these other major metropolitan areas where there's a lot of people,
But that goes back to the way the state constitution is designed, right? We want to have the elected DAs do their job. And if you're not doing it, as is in Travis County, you need to find a new DA.
Vote them out.
Vote them out. That's it.
Now, the border is a complete different issue.
Just wait years, and then finally this might get dealt with.
Yeah.
Not great. Okay, so this is just a ball of fun. Okay, so what happens to the kids? So they get rescued or whatever happens, and then what? What happens?
It's $1 million question, right?
Like I just said a few minutes ago, that one girl that we thought had so much promise and swore up and down that she was on the straight and narrow, and for a while she was. But that lure and those pimps hounding her drug her back in.
How often does that happen as a percentage, do you think?
Recidivism is
extremely high.
Extremely high.
Yeah, you're looking at... Oh gosh, I don't even know that you could put a number to it, but it's high.
It's very high.
More than 50%, you think?
Oh, God, yeah, absolutely. I would say almost 90%.
Almost 90 is right.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So they they get a taste for it, and that's their life.
Yeah, I mean,
is it the drugs? Is it?
No, not more often than not. It's they're sober. A lot of pimps will not let their women do drugs.
Interesting.
Think about it like a used car. If I give you 2 cars, both identical, and one is dented and has cosmetic issues, and I give you your pick of which one, you're going to pick the one that looks better. Same thing with human beings, unfortunately. We're paying for a commodity, for a product. So I don't think it's necessarily the drugs. I think it's 99% psychological, and look at it similar to domestic violence. How long does it take a woman to escape a domestic violence situation? Usually a long time. Now add in, not only is it that domestic violence, but we're also making time to have fun. So now we're in Austin. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to go to South by Southwest. We're going to enjoy all these cool things and this lavish, look at the Lexus we have and all of those things. It counterbalances it. You look at yourself and what's going on and you may hate it, but then you're looking at everything else and it's enjoyable. It's by design from the trafficker.
It's an interesting point that he brings up too. And I know you'll concur on this one, but major events attract a lot of pimps. Super Bowl.
So I've worked the last 2 Super Bowls.
That's right.
Yeah, one in Tampa. I'll give you an example. You have 4,000 cops descending on one location for one purpose, right? So if we were to say, hey, 4,000 cops going to Super Bowl in Phoenix this year, I want you to do nothing but arrest people for heroin. We can then argue that heroin dealing is the biggest thing around the Super Bowl, right?
Sure.
So it just anecdotally and just in my experience, we'll use Florida as an example. We'd ask, why are you here? You're from New York. Well, it's middle of COVID. Florida's wide open. We came here because we can do whatever we want. And then, while we're here we go. Very few people said that they came for the Super Bowl itself. Flip side, think about it like this. If I'm a trafficker in Houston, say Austin, and I know the Super Bowl's in Phoenix and there's going to be 5,000 cops arresting everybody, I'm staying here. I can make more money, right? Supply and demand, and I don't have to worry as much. One of the other things to really do is look at the Super Bowl in LA. 500 human trafficking arrests, right? Very similar to Tampa. If you file a Freedom of Information Act request, as I did, and get the names of everybody, you would find that about 450 of those arrests were actually women for selling prostitution. So we're really doing more damage than good when we put all these cops there to make all these arrests, because we're not really arresting traffickers. The Super Bowl in Miami only had 3 trafficker arrests. 3.
And I apologize. I think that's what I meant, that there was quite a bit of that going on at these events. Not so much the traffickers themselves.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I would say buyers probably increase a little bit. The only thing that I really noticed just personally in the months leading up to Tampa, for instance, I didn't realize there was a strip club next to my hotel till Super Bowl. And I was driving to the hotel and I was like, what in the world is going on here? I saw that increase, right? So definitely more patrons at the strip clubs, but does that equal an increase of trafficking? It's really hard to.
Yeah. So what happens, we talked about the more adults that get rescued, or at least people who are, let's say teenagers. But what happens for the, infants and very, very young that get rescued? What is their life after?
Well, that's tough. I mean, you talk about trauma even predating birth, right? So, I mean, there's tons of studies that are out there. I recommend obviously a lot with Brene Brown and her podcast, and just talking about trauma. I mean, there's plenty of data to support the fact that it happens. You're suffering from trauma prior. So, at 4 years old, 3 years old, is there trauma that's going to occur? Absolutely. Are they going to deal with that for the rest of their life? Absolutely. There's no 2 ways, to get around that. But when we get and we really start looking at that age, statistically speaking, again, it's a very, very small percentage of children at that age that are being trafficked. Extremely small. One thing you find a lot, and especially in the news and with law enforcement, there's an attorney, the Missouri Attorney General is real big on this. Well, we rescued a 4-year-old. 4-year-old's mom is a sex worker. You didn't rescue the kid. You didn't rescue the kid from anything. Probably a bad home life, but not trafficking, So it's tough. I mean, it's tough all the way across the board.
Interesting. So I know we kind of discounted the border towns as being a avenue for some of this, but surely there is some amount of human trafficking going on at the border. Is that just such a small number you don't even think about it these days? Because there's millions of people coming across the border.
Yeah.
And from what I gather, at least some of them are being used purely as sort of a decoy and saying, this is my child, even though it's not my child. Now, what happens to that child afterwards is anyone's guess, but
they go back south and then they get recirculated, right? So the Border Patrol can turn around and say this kid's crossed 8 times with 8 different people. When it comes to trafficking on the border, it's an interesting beast. Most politicians will tell you about how horrible the human trafficking is on the border. We have a smuggling crisis. We have a human smuggling crisis. There's no doubt. It's mind blowing. It's really interesting. I was doing some stuff in McAllen, and when I was chatting with potential sex buyers, when I introduced the thought of a kid, I had not a single one willing to buy a kid. Not one. If I do the same thing in Beaumont, 40% generally end up in an arrest for somebody trying to buy a kid. So when we look at...
Why is that? Why is it so different?
I don't know. No idea.
Just the cartels say don't do it?
Hey, I think obviously cartels run a lot of stuff in the border. That's why some of the cities are so safe. But I mean, honestly,
yeah.
But I don't have that answer. I can tell you that my concern is not an increase in sex trafficking as a result of the border crisis. I don't think it's increased. I don't think it's going to increase significantly. Where my concern lies is over the next 5 years, what's going to happen with all these people who came here for a better life and are being exploited through labor.
That's where it's going to happen. Exactly where it's going to happen.
The labor portion of it.
Yeah.
So they're going to get here. They're going to be so poor. They're going to be looking for their next.
That's why they're here, right? Trying to.
And the women are going to seek low-hanging fruit.
And that's how you end up with prostitution down below 35 down here, let's say. Yeah, that was an interesting kind of eye-opener for me living downtown is I saw there was some amount of sex work going on. And on the surface, I don't really care that much that someone wants to sell their body, but what happened around that was very interesting. Now you start seeing the drug dealers come in, and now you start seeing like territorial disputes, and there's a lot more going on there than just that one, but human, it might be completely consensual from their perspective, but it's sort of this ancillary network of people that has to be there to sort of make that whole thing work that's where the real crime starts really popping up, even if you could say that is 100% consensual.
Yeah, I think, again, consent is such a difficult thing under those circumstances. I've never met a person engaged in commercial sex that said that their first choice in life was to become a sex worker, right? So why are you here? And we can really evaluate that for everything it's worth. And generally speaking, there's reasons why they're there. So consensual, I don't know. But when you look at kind of what you said, all the crimes that kind of circle it, ask most trafficking victims, who's the most violent person in your life? It's not the trafficker, it's the buyers. So when you look at the amount of people that are physically assaulted, murdered, beaten, whatever, by somebody as a result of that commercial sex, it's usually the buyers, not the traffickers.
How many of those get reported?
Oh, very few.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's what I would think.
Right? So the woman has no incentive really to stop that person. They're just never going to go out with them again.
No, they'll definitely communicate to other women. Hey, don't answer this number.
Right.
But let's be real. I can't tell you how many times a woman has reported a sexual assault. How are you sexually assaulted? You're a prostitute, right? That's crazy. Law enforcement, it's mind blowing. I mean, this person's not a victim of crime because of the circumstances they're in. That's crazy. But I've seen too where they get arrested for doing their role in that crime, and you're like, but what about the guy who actually committed the crime?
Yeah, they've been horribly brutalized.
Yeah, and a lot of times by the system, right? So, why do I need to trust you? I saw an arrest in Wichita Falls, made me sick. I wanted to, but they put this girl's mugshot on the news, and throughout the story, they had arrested her for prostitution. She was exchanging sex for some kind of little cinnamon fries for breakfast from Sonic.
Jesus.
Now, how good do you feel about yourself? You arrested this person who's trying to literally eat. That is mind blowing. Why would she ever report a crime to the Wichita Falls Police Department at this point?
Right.
No reason. Right. And I get it. There's no reason to trust them.
Right. So I have a personal story about my involvement and why I care about this particular thing. So once upon a time, I watched this movie Sleepers. I don't know if you've ever seen this movie. And I watched it with my dad, and he basically said to me, why doesn't somebody, just get online and start finding these people? It seems like you should be able to do that, especially since I was a security guy. I am a security guy. So I thought it was a good idea, and so I found somebody, a friend of mine, to co-start an organization called EHAP, Ethical Hackers Against Pedophilia. And we basically went into a bunch of chat channels and, underground forums or whatever, anything we could find that we could think of, Usenet groups and so on. And very quickly we found a lot. It wasn't this wasn't like a many day long expedition down the rabbit hole. This is pretty much right away. And we had a couple interesting mishaps where we were actually hacking each other at one point, which I thought was really funny. But for the most part, we were just doing exactly what you would expect us to do. We're finding the bad guys and tracking as much as we could about them. Now, they were all using encrypted forms of communication even back then. And this is 20 years ago now or plus. So we couldn't actually see most of the material. It was actually quite rare that we could see anything, if ever. It's just like occasionally someone would mess up and it would be publicly accessible. But for the most part, it was all encrypted. So what we were doing was basically just monitoring the unencrypted communication, which is usually just how to set up the encrypted chat or how to communicate in ways that can evade the police, and following that part of the chat, which is all publicly accessible because they need the next person to understand how to do it. This is an organization called Pedophile U, as in Pedophile University, as in they teach you how to be a pedophile, which is pretty awful. And I actually ended up being the guy to bust them because it turns out that they, one of the heads of this thing basically was using a communication unencrypted to another guy saying, hey, you probably live down the street from me. Hell, you probably are my next door neighbor. And I'm like, how would he know that? What, there's nothing about this communication itself, but I realized in the headers of the document had his IP address. And I realized that the guy was using a VPN and protecting himself. The guy who was new, who wasn't trained yet, they're right next door. And that's how it ended up breaking the case open. So it was a bust of 37 people or something like that, which was at the time, I think, the largest bust in history. Now, Innocent Images just blows us away. Those numbers are rookie compared to what they do these days. So I learned a lot during that process, a lot about both the law and how things kind of work and the background and some of the awful things that happen, like pay-per-view child rapes and all kinds of insane things that even by today's standards are pretty insane, that such a thing it would possibly exist 20 years ago. And yet it did. And there it was. And there's all these very technical people helping out and trying to make it better, and internet innovation at its finest. So I came out of that with a bunch of different feelings about it. Number one, I definitely get the idea of why even a single image should be considered illegal. Totally get it. Although obviously I was doing something, I had a different purpose in mind for that. And it was really gut-wrenching to watch this go down. Number two, we actually ran into one of the women who had her images publicly accessible. We actually had something run on the news at one point, and she got in contact with us and said, hey, I'm one of those people, and I can see my images out there. I know where they are. I'm seeing myself being raped over and over again every time things gets reported back to the victim, And then number three, I realized I never wanted to do that ever again. I never wanted to spend another minute looking at that stuff or thinking about it really outside of conversations like this, because it was just awful. It really, really turned my whole brain inside out, and massive depression. How do you kind of feel about your job? Obviously you've been doing it for 8 years, just this particular thing that you're doing now. How do you feel about this whole industry?
I love it. For me, I'm really good at compartmentalizing things, right? So I remember I worked with had a new guy that was working with me several years ago, and he told me, he said, these images that we had done this case on, he said, man, it's messing with me. I'm not with my wife and, whatever. And, I told him, I said, what you're looking at is not sex. Don't confuse the two. What you're looking at is rape, and you're looking at evidence. That's all it is. It's evidence. Mm-hmm. When we really start digging into it, for me, as law enforcement, I can put you in prison for burglary, theft, homicide, child sexual abuse material, trafficking. Mm-hmm. I don't like burglars, but it's not my thing. Mm-hmm. So I look at it and I'm like, where am I making the biggest impact? And for me, it's in dealing with those people, because they're truly the most heinous, evil pieces of crap that walk the face of the earth. So
they really are.
And to that point, in that particular pay-per-view child rape, the mother was holding the child down while the dad was doing the thing. This was a family organization.
Yeah, very common. So that same particular case I just mentioned, I remember as I was scrolling through the images and the videos, I came across one that looked homemade. And when I clicked it, the child was obviously being raped, and he said the man's name. It was my suspect. So at that point, I knew, like, this is a hell of a victory. This guy's going to go to prison for the rest of his life, and now we can get help for this kid. Other than nobody would have ever known if he never outcried. So, yeah, to me, is it fun? Absolutely not. When it comes to that side of it, but to me, it's a tremendous impact that I wouldn't find in burglary investigations.
So it's the same thing with me. I deal with it not every day like Joe does, but as I write about it, as I speak about it, as I do my charitable work.
And meet more victims, too. You're meeting a lot of people these days.
A lot of victims. Yeah. And you have to compartmentalize it, like Joe said. Do you want to take out every one of these bastards? Yeah, I do. Can you? No, you're not going to be able to do it. But you can, as Joe is doing it, he's doing it one guy at a time, and he's doing a hell of a job.
Sure. So I was definitely more of a black hat than a white hat hacker at the time that I started this whole thing. And that is the reason I actually became a white hat hacker, or I would say more gray, but can never be completely white. But the reason why is I just could not look myself in the mirror and think during the my evening hours, I'm saving kids, and during the day, I'm, doing something bad. Like I couldn't make that work in my brain. And so that was pretty much the last time I did anything even vaguely interesting. But it also made me quit the organization. I just I couldn't reconcile all these things that were going on in my head at the same time. I'm like, I just need to step back. And it went on, and it continued to run for years after my departure, but with some very great people, by the way. But I personally had to take a big step back. What's the attrition rate like on these types of things? Are you seeing like people in your organization just run for the hills, or are they in it to win it?
I've seen, some departments will limit you, say 2 years. You can only do 2 years of this and you move on. I don't agree with that. I don't think you, for one, even know what you're doing for the first year and a half. I get why they do it, but I think if you have people who can do it and can do it, and it not affect them, in such a negative way that it's a problem. But, I've had people work with me for 6 months, walk in, hand the phone, and say, I'm done.
Sure.
And, I've had people that we've worked together for years. I think it's just each individual person. I think, kind of as you stated, looking at that stuff is traumatic. How do you deal with it?
Joe has a passion, and it's obvious.
I have a very good memory, and I think that's part of the problem. I just can't forget it.
Well, to your point, though, technology has got to advance. We've got to get more technology involved in hunting these predators. Mm-hmm. And again, some of the things that are being done with artificial intelligence and machine learning are helping, but there's a lot that needs to be done. And it's just, for example, looking at pictures online, or you can't tell whether the girl is 12 or sometimes you can, but you can't tell whether she's 12 or 19. And so that goes undetected. Now, there are certain sites that, say this is, for 12 and 13-year-old girls, but sure. More advancements need to be made in that front. And more busts need to be made, which he's spearheading,
sure.
on pornographers. They're despicable.
So, okay, let's talk about the duty to file, or duty to announce that I've found this evidence or whatever. How seriously does the government look at that retroactively and say, well, we saw this thing posted. Who who did see this on Facebook? Because clearly someone saw it. Was it 5 people, 100 people, and then backtrack who those people are and kind of say, well, even if you didn't enjoy this material, you had a duty and you failed to report this kind of thing. Like how seriously do you take that?
I think it would depend on the amount of images, right? So if you have somebody that we can show that they viewed an image, we don't know if it was intentional, accidental, especially on something like Facebook.
Sure.
You start getting a dark web and you're digging around, you know what you're doing, right? Yep. But if you're on Facebook and you come across it, that's one thing. The way most laws work too, there's filing for not reporting a felony isn't as easy as you think. There have to be very certain parameters within that.
Sure. What are they? Give me an example.
For one, we have to be able to prove that you're in no danger by reporting it, right? So what is danger to you? I don't know. If I came across it, and my first defense would be if I was somebody that came to me, I'd be like, look, I saw it. I didn't know if this was Russian organized crime, and now they know who I am, my IP address, my Facebook account. I didn't know what to do. I panicked and clicked out. Barring kind of what Penn just said, if I ask you, I didn't know if that person was 12 or 15 or 17, or I just didn't know. It made me uncomfortable, so I clicked out. Now, if we have that 20, 30, 40 times, you're not just accidentally poking around.
Sure.
It's one thing that we always talk about when we're interviewing people for child sexual abuse material is, I always try to provide them an out. What did you accidentally click that led to this? Oh, I think I was watching Pornhub and I clicked this and clicked. You don't go from Pornhub to child sexual abuse material that easy. So really you have to evaluate everything for what it is, every single crime.
Sure. So one thing that I think is kind of interesting about that, though, is there really is no carve out for like citizen vigilantes like I was once upon a time, or citizen journalists or whatever, who aren't at all interested in the material, but definitely interested in either what's going on in the culture, what's driving people to it, or trying to find them and report them or whatever. Like, what's your personal take on that? I realize what the law is, but where do you stand on that? Let's put it this way. If someone came to you and said, hey, I ran my own personal investigation, I found these 3 child pornographers, are you going to go, hey, let me look at your hard drive and bust you? Or are you going to say, I get what you were trying to do here? Like, what is... That
would really have to be evaluated for what it's worth, right?
Sure.
And the thing is, most people, that's the number one excuse, actually. When we kick a door, I found this, I saved all these images, and I was going to bring them to you. It's number one excuse.
Really?
Absolutely. 100%. It's almost the same song and dance every time. So the question is, like, what really was the intent? If you're downloading 100 images, like, I'm sorry, but I'm not really buying this.
Right.
Also looking at what the background is, right? Are you a cyber person, and this is kind of what your background, you're trying to ethically hack?
Sure.
It goes back to one thing, though, to me, is people don't want to look at children being raped.
Nope.
Nobody wants to see it.
Nope.
So if you're intentionally going and looking for it for whatever purpose, there's something there that is not
right.
Not right.
Right.
And one of the things we see this a lot, like vigilante organizations and anti-human trafficking. We're going to do our rescue. We're going to bring you all this. If you want to be the police, I can show you where the police academy is. You can go, you can study, you can learn all this stuff, learn how to do it, come on and do it. But, you don't get to do this whole...
Leave it to the professionals.
Yeah. It's such a dicey issue there.
All right. So there's so much to unpack there. Okay. So I actually have an interesting story about this, this number one excuse, get out of jail free card. So one day I got a ping from this old chat forum that I had set up like a million years ago, basically a way to get in touch with me. I kind of forgot it was even working. Like no one ever went there, but I got this message. I'm like, what is this? It says it's from the DHS. Yeah, right. And so I trace him back. I'm like, oh crap.
Yeah.
DHS actually is trying to get in touch with me. So I reach out to this detective, Homeland Security, and he's like, hey, we need to come by your office. We need to talk to you about some stuff. I'm like, okay, well, here's where I work and whatever. So these agents show up, a number of them show up at my office and they have questions for me, which is extremely awkward because I worked at eBay at the time. So this isn't like some hole in the wall somewhere. This is like parading people through this, you know, Fortune 500 or whatever. It was very, very awkward. Anyway, and so they basically said, hey, there's this guy who claims that he knows you, and he claims that you told him to download a whole bunch of child pornography and then put malware in there, and then he would then upload it to all these servers, and then they would execute the malware, and then he would know who they are or something, right? And I'm like, okay, you got to send me whatever information you can on this guy. Like, I don't know, maybe I did talk to him at some point. I talked to a lot of people, so please send me whatever you have on the name or whatever. So they did. And I did everything I could to figure out if I'd ever talked to this guy. Name never appeared anywhere. And back then I really did have every email I'd ever sent kind of thing, multiple drive failures ago. But anyway, nope, nothing. And I had proof for it and I can show them if they actually wanted to dig through my email or whatever. I'm like, nope. But furthermore, the exploit that he was talking about didn't come out until after they busted him. So his excuse didn't time-wise jive with the exploit that he was talking about. So I proved that to them. I'm like, unless he's the guy who wrote the exploit or had some other knowledge, there's no possible way this guy is doing what he said. So I sent that to him, and they're like, we need to come to your office. I'm like, oh, geez. What now?
Yeah, here comes the federal indictment.
Right? I was getting a little nervous. And they're like, oh, yeah, no, everything's good. Do you want a job? I'm like, no, I do not want a job. So that was one of those where I got a taste of your exact anecdote there about it being such a common out. You know, oh, I was just downloading this for evidence or whatever. But on the flip side, so your other statement there about leaving it to the police. So obviously, if I had left that to the police would not have done that bust. They would not have. I mean, maybe eventually or something, years down the road, some other tip would have broken or something. But honestly, I don't have any reason to believe that's true. These guys were very smart. They were doing everything right except for this one off-color comment this guy made, this very small mistake. Another friend of mine is a very good friend of mine. He has a long time decided he's going to be a vigilante. He's the guy who's out there with body armor and actually going and doing busts and fully armed and, you know, deep undercover, the whole thing. Now, the local police and where he lives basically kind of look the other way for the most part at the most senior level. The people on the ground have no idea who he is, though. So he does get arrested on site, and they basically, he said, here's my get out of jail free card, calls this guy. They call the guy, and he's like, yep, give him his body armor and gun back and let him out back on the street. Like, that's his life. That's what he does. And he does enjoy it, yes. And yes, he has made some fairly enormous busts in the past. And his frustration is that this kind of comment, he's like, I need more help. I need more money to go do these things. I need more resources. It's not, the police aren't doing it. For whatever reason, the police haven't done these things that I'm seeing all around me. And I can report them all day long. Maybe a year from now, they'll finally get around to it on the long laundry list of other things they'd be dealing with. But a lot of the crimes he goes after are so minor on face value that there isn't much of a case there. But he knows what's going on under the hood. So he's like, look, it's not, no one's going to drool over this case, but there's something much deeper here. Like he's gone after some very large organizations, including ones online that, you know, dating sites that are, you know, clearly not actually that. There's something much, much worse. So what is your feeling about that? I mean, like he's out there doing something. I mean, he's making a name for himself,
but you know,
with a hit on his head for sure. I mean,
the way I look at it is, he could be hindering good work that's going on by professionals.
Quite possibly.
Yeah. So I had to have that conversation with somebody pretty recently. Wanted to do vigilante, and you know, I told him, if you interfere with something that I have going on, even if you don't know it, you will go to jail. Like, I am doing this properly, correctly. You know, the other issue you run into is, I always ask people, what are the Texas rules of evidence? Tell me about them. Tell me what's admissible. Tell me what's not admissible. How do I get the Facebook screen grabs that you have into court? Did you know I have to have a business record affidavit from Facebook, you know, authenticating that? No. So it's dicey. And, we worry obviously about blue on blue. I don't want to be stinging a cop.
Yeah.
I also don't want to be stinging a civilian, because I can tell you right now, if I come around the corner and there's a civilian with body armor and a weapon, we're not going to have a civilian anymore.
Right.
Right. So it's tough. It's very, very tough. I would discourage
You would advise him not to.
I would advise him and anybody thinking they should not to do that.
He's an interesting character. I think you'd really like him as an individual.
I'm all for gray. I love dancing in the gray.
Yeah.
I just, again, if he's out doing it, needs more funding, needs that, why not reach out to the police department and say, you know what, I'll go to the police academy and I'll be a reserve officer. I'll volunteer for you guys. Just give me the badge. And then now you have somebody who is credentialed, who's working with law enforcement to be able to do this.
And understands the chain of evidence.
And understands all of that.
He's a longtime security guy as well, so I'm sure, is very aware of how to make evidence admissible. And I'm sure he has hidden cameras everywhere and so on. So
surely.
But anyway, I do get your point, and I think for anyone watching this who really this gets their hackles up and they want to go do something about it, I would discourage them as well.
Well, yeah, and you go back to the camera issue. I mean, think about what happened with the show, Live PD in Williamson County, right? So now you're telling me you've got this camera over here that has evidence of a crime on it. Guess whose camera that is now? It's not yours anymore,
right?
So it's dicey. You really set yourself up for failure. I recorded it on my phone. Well, thanks for the phone.
So yeah, well, he has enough money. I think he's not that worried about that issue. But the kinds of money he needs is more like hundreds of $1,000s to fly here and do these operations, and he's much bigger money that you might get just from a paycheck. So about the one image per bust sort of situation, right? This is one of the things that worries me the most about our law, because my job is getting things on computers that shouldn't be there, right? And I have ways to get every single cell phone, every single desktop, laptop, computer on the planet, and every web server to have any image I want at any time I feel like doing that. It wouldn't cost me very much money infrastructure to make that happen. If I can do that, and I can do it once, that means I can do it twice, 10 times. So whatever threshold you say is the minimum, what you would decide is the minimum bar, I could easily exceed that, no problem. So to me, what seems like is missing from the law is intent. And there's one thing about having something on a computer. So a very good example of this is a friend of mine used to run an ISP, and one of the problems he runs into is someone downloads a bunch of child pornography on his computers. They're his computers, but everyone knows what's going on here, right? So he has the problem of now that is evidence, and now you need to physically remove drives, and those drives have everyone else's data on them as well. And so now his computers are going offline, and all this chain of evidence just basically nukes his company. So he's managed to stave off completely going offline a couple of times, but it was by the hair of his chinny chin chin kind of thing. And, phone calls to people who could make things happen sort of thing, like pulling strings sort of deal. So, I mean, there's one thing about stopping this, which I totally understand. There's one thing about having a big collection and it being yours, totally understand. But there's this weird gray area where it's like, yes, that is his, but it's not his. And yes, that's on your computer. It could have gotten there in a million ways, and there's no proof at all that you were interested in this. Yeah. So how does that play out for you in court? And
I mean, so it's really the totality of the circumstances. What is it? Obviously, there's interviews that take place. More often than not, like I said, they'll tell you, hey, this is what I was doing.
I was hoarding child pornography.
Yeah, right.
Collected for you.
In the state of Texas, it's intentionally or knowingly possess. If I know it's there, I'm not getting rid of it, I've technically committed. I've met the element of that culpable mental state. Sure. I would argue that people that don't want it would immediately delete it and not store it.
So, for instance, it's on the blockchain right now. Yeah. There is child pornography on the blockchain. So anyone who is downloading Bitcoin, the entire ledger or whatever, has child pornography on their computer.
Yeah.
And a lot of the pornographers use Bitcoin as the currency now.
Yeah, I mean, they use
So
whatever.
it's
They
not
use
traceable.
whatever. But they use it. Well, it is traceable. Let's.
Yeah, that's definitely.
But yes and no.
The question is this though. So when you look at people who generally possess child sexual abuse material,
Sure.
it's on thumb drives, iPad, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
If you can tell me this is how this happened and it's here
Mm-hmm.
and no intent, once it touches a thumb drive, you intended on
Sure.
keeping it.
Yeah.
So I think, again, it goes back to everything. You have to evaluate based on the circumstances. So your friend is an example. If he said, look, this is what's going on, full and what makes sense. Now, if it's on his thumb drive, wow, that starts changing the game. It goes to, a million different things. When was it downloaded? Okay, so May 17th. Okay.
Or even there, May 17th.
Yeah, can you tell me that? Okay, well, this is what happened. May 18th, May 19th, May 20th. We're intending on downloading it at this point, So it just, everything has to be evaluated for what it's worth.
Okay, so you really do look at the totality of all of the evidence in hand.
Every single individual case.
That's pretty brutal. That's a pretty onerous task for you.
Yeah, but if you don't do it, my biggest fear has never been not arresting somebody who committed a crime. It's been arresting the person who didn't commit a crime.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm not doing my due diligence to determine whether or not you committed the crime, I actually was asked by a defense attorney on the stand one time, do you think you're judge, jury, and executioner? I said, absolutely. He said, well, what grants you that authority? And I'm like, well, if I'm not convinced that this person committed a crime, why in God's name would I put handcuffs on them and put them in the criminal justice system?
Mm-hmm.
So again, it breaks down to every individual criminal investigation.
Sure.
How are you in the world of child pornography? How are you able to are you able to track these offshore sites that are growing daily? And those are examples of where Bitcoin's being used quite a bit. Are you able to, or?
Ish. So as an example, we just fairly recently worked a case that stemmed from Australia. So I knew the person was, my person downloaded from peer-to-peer from Australia. Mm-hmm. So we'll go through in his, find out everywhere that's gone, identify everybody, and send it. So it may be in, India, maybe in UK, whatever. And that's the beauty of being able to work so closely with Homeland Security, is that there's attachés everywhere. Mm-hmm. So now I have this case that now it touches Germany, for instance. I can send it to the German government. We actually sent one yesterday to the Spanish government. So we had a case that touched Spain. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely doable. It's painstaking. It takes a while, and obviously we're missing a good chunk, but can definitely do it.
Do you believe, I know you're making a dent in this problem, but do you believe there is a way to actually, maybe through technology down the road or whatever, to actually decrease this whole problem and either make it diminish entirely or reduce it to the point where it's just such a rare event we barely hear about it?
I personally don't. I think that
this is the way things are going to be.
I think it is, and I think that we're at the tip of the digital spear, right? So what's going to happen next? We've got kids that are growing up knowing about OnlyFans and watching pornography. That 8, 9, 10 years old. What is that doing to their brain? And by the time they get 30 and 40, what are they going to be seeking out? And that's difficult. It's like anything else. The more technology evolves, think back as a kid, the worst thing you saw was probably Dad's Playboy magazine, right? And then it evolved into Penthouse and Hustler and all worse and worse and worse. Then we moved to VHS and DVD and streaming, and it's just blown up. So I think we're always going to be one step behind.
Absolutely. And as it applies to trafficking, there's a move afoot to legalize prostitution. That's not going to put a dent in it. There's a big move to make everybody arrest every John out there. That's not going to put a dent in it. It's the dumbest thing that's ever said, but it's true. Is that it's the oldest profession on the planet, so you got to deal with it.
It's interesting too, looking at criminality, like you brought up. I'm for decriminalization of selling sex, but the only reason I'm for that is because the law enforcement is criminalizing victims of human trafficking. Mm-hmm. So I really feel we need to take that ability away, right?
I agree.
So it's dicey when you start talking that.
And for the audience's perspective, just so that's a very important point there. Your concern is that people who are otherwise just victims are actually going to go to jail because they get caught in a sting.
By and large, that's what happens
in
in
most cases.
Yeah, that's 90. When I always challenge people before you start clicking share, because somebody did this huge operation. Look at the mugshots. If the mugshots are 90% women, we have a huge problem. Huge problem, and that's primarily what you see. They're getting away from it now. Cops are getting smart. I've noticed one of the police departments in Texas. I'm not going to say which one. It's the largest. Got away from posting pictures of women. So I always challenge people.
Oh,
check the mugshots versus the number of arrests. How many mugshots are there? There's 30 mugshots, and 75 arrests. There's a reason for it. We're criminalizing victims of trafficking at rates that are astronomical compared to traffickers.
And it's part of the problem.
It is.
It seems almost counterproductive because now these victims are not. It's not like they're free of it. Now they're in the institutionalized, and they're going to come back out potentially much worse. And the market demand's still there, so the traffickers are going to have to find someone else to put in their place.
Well, the thing is, you put a girl in jail for prostitution, right? She's going to go down there. She's going to get $1,000 bond. He's going to show up. He's going to pay $150. He's going to get her out. Who's actually paying for that money, for that bail? He's not. So she's going to get turned back out to have to make that money back up. She's probably going to be in trouble for getting caught, and her quota is not going away. So if she has to make $2,000 a day, she's going right back out. So really, we're putting them in increased vulnerability, and really putting them. We're creating an environment where the trafficker is the truth teller.
Well said.
Quota. That's such an ugly. I'm so used to that in the traditional sales term.
Yeah.
Like, you got to make your quota, otherwise you don't get
That's
your bonus.
what it is. That's exactly what it is.
You do not come home tonight until you have $2,000. I don't care if you have to make it till 10 p.m. or 7 a.m. You will not come back home without that money.
I've seen Innocent Images, Division FBI. I don't know how closely you work with them or whatever, but one of the things I've seen them starting to do is arrest 100 people at a time. And it's exactly the number 100. It's not 101. It's not 99. And I gotta think that's gotta have a deep psychological impact on the child pornographers or whatever who are around them, because they've got to be thinking, I probably just skated by. I'm probably 101, and I'll get in the next bust. And that's got to be terrifying. It's a strong psychological. It's not just a nice round number.
Yeah.
It's also like they had to choose to not include people in that cohort. And it could have been, me, so that's got to put a scare into a lot of these people. I would just have to imagine. Do you think that sort of psychology is that intentional, or is that just a happy consequence?
I think it depends, right? So when it comes to trafficking operations, where we're very big on arresting buyers, and we'll put the buyers on the news. So what it has done, it has decreased the amount of trafficking we have going on.
Oh, really?
It's very obvious. Yeah, there was an NIJ study that was done in Atlantic City that was showing that if you specifically target buyers very focused, it can reduce trafficking 75%. Just looking at what we're dealing with, I believe that 100%, because that's exactly what we've seen. Because if you're a buyer in Waco, Texas, you have to be afraid that not only are you going to jail, but that you're going to be put all over the internet.
And it's a very tight-knit community.
Yeah. So
and once you're a sex offender list, you can't do anything really without being.
Well, they're not actually sex offenders when it comes to
really
to soliciting prostitution. No, you don't become a sex offender. But now what you're looking at is now it's a felony in the state of Texas. We're the first state to have that. So looking
I'm
at
surprised that isn't a sex offense, since it is related to. Well, if it's aggravated, is that considered?
No. So
Really?
solicitation of prostitution, the penalty increases every time. So now you go to a state jail facility. Huh. Next one's a 3rd-degree felony. So so it increases. But
that generally applies to pedophiles.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's generally what the word aggravated tends to mean in this context, right? Where it's
not necessarily.
Not always?
No, it depends. For me, in the anti-trafficking world, aggravated means more than one is some kind of sex case, generally aggravated, insinuates that there's a weapon that was used or something that caused serious bodily injury, things like that. When it comes to child sexual abuse material, it's the distribution, which the beauty of the law in the state of Texas anyway, if you have 3 or more images, it's presumed that you are distributing. So it very quickly puts everybody in that umbrella.
Gotcha. Cool.
And an example of a victim, and we all know this victim, was trafficked and was at a party or something where they were the girls were working the party, and the party was interrupted with gunfire, and people died, and this young lady was arrested for murder, and it's still on her record. So
I'll get her on the podcast at some point if I can. I think that's an interesting case. And I get your point, though, that this is really, we're going after the wrong people here.
Right.
We're going after the
That's my
victims
point.
of this. That's pretty terrible.
Yeah.
Is there some momentum about changing these laws? And
Depends on where you're at, right? So there's places that they're 100% hell-bent on locking those girls up. They committed a crime, and they're not going to tell me about that crime, therefore they're a criminal. I disagree with that. I think it's crazy. No other crime in anybody's penal code do you get criminalized for being the victim of. We don't arrest people for being victim of burglary. We don't arrest domestic violence victims and tell them, look, we're doing this for your own safety. But that's been the practice by law enforcement when it comes to anti-trafficking work for years. So it's the accepted norm.
Right.
The other thing is too, one thing, you find, I got an argument one time with a vice cop from the largest city in Texas. And, I asked him, I said, he told me, he said, look, this girl came and she told me that had I not arrested her, she would be dead. I saved her by arresting her. And I'm like, you know what? That is actually a wonderful story. Like, really it is. But how many women have you arrested for prostitution? Like 200. Okay. So 0.5% of the time you got it right. 99.5% of the time you're ruining somebody's life. How do you justify that? And hopefully it made his head spin a little bit, but cops are an interesting beast, and ego's a hell of a thing. So, telling somebody what they're doing is not right when it's been the norm for the last 30 years of vice operations. It's difficult.
yeah, it's one of the reasons I think law cannot be perfect. If it's too perfect, if it's too enforced too well, then you don't give any room for things to change. And I think this is a very good example of where this law feels like it does need to be changed.
Yes.
Yeah, part of the deal is too is we have the age old, I didn't write the law, I'm just here to enforce it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, my question is, are you a public servant or are you here to enforce every law? And one thing I always ask is, when was the last time, do you arrest people for possession of marijuana? Nah, I dump it on the side of the road, send them on their way. Same level of offense as prostitution. Why is this so egregious at the same level that you are so compelled that you have to enforce the law when you let laws walk all the time? You have that discretion. Why are we doing this? And that even gets into a bunch of gender issues, I think.
There is something about, you might be right about that. There's something about legislating from the bench, but there's also legislating from the cop car.
Yeah.
And I think that does happen very frequently.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. So let's talk about sextortion. This is something it does happen.
Yes, it does.
And in fact, it's becoming a booming business. I think it's kind of a fast way to find these victims online, is just find some sample of material that they've already uploaded and you leverage that, or get them to send it to you under false pretense, and then it just starts the spiral. Are you seeing that? Is that a thing that is happening more and more in your world? Is that?
It is definitely increasing. There's no doubt. Generally, where we're seeing it, though, is against males. Interesting. So somebody, if they're female or pretending to be female, will befriend a male, get them to send explicit photographs, because we generally think with the wrong head. Mm-hmm. And once we can get them to do that, then they're turning around. They're like, hey, here you are on Facebook. Here's your wife. Here's everything. I need X amount. And generally speaking, those are coming from Nigeria, from other countries. Where we see it in the trafficking community, it's kind of interesting. There's a quote former trafficker, which I wouldn't say he's a former trafficker if he's doing this, but he'll go try to track down who the people involved in the commercial sex, who their families are, and then start, hey, I'm going to send this picture, this video, whatever that I found on OnlyFans or whatever it is to Jim Jones, your daddy. You know, I need X amount of money. So we do see that from time to time, but it's way more prevalent when it's male victims of sextortion.
To me, this feels like a huge national security threat, because if it's that easy, because I believe you, because many young men thinking that they might have a chance with a lovely lady might go out of their way to do something extremely dumb, but that just, as soon as they're weaponized, as soon as they're turned by that minor threat, what else are they willing to do? And that can become enormous and very dangerous very quickly. Have you encountered that yet? Is that a problem that we have yet to see?
I have, and I agree. It's a huge national security issue. You know, how are spies usually? They come in the form of a woman who's meeting somebody at a bar, right?
But now you don't even have to go to the bar.
Yeah. So, I think it's huge. I think part of the other issue is just looking at that. How many apps people use. You know, we're using Face app, taking pictures of ourselves in apps that are in China, right? or other Russia. Like, that makes zero sense to be doing that. And we're dealing with foreign governments that, you know, are what they are. So I could see it as a huge issue.
I remember this one time I was having drinks with some friends or whatever, and there was this guy, and everyone seemed to be like corralling themselves around this person who I'd never met, knew nothing about him, didn't know him from Adam. Turns out he's a billionaire, but I didn't know this at the time, right? So I go over to him, and he's just talking this big old game, like, oh, I've got nothing to hide, like all these privacy wonks, and like, you know, they don't know what they're talking about, et cetera, et cetera. And again, no idea who this person is. I'm like, can you give me your wallet, please? And he looked at me and he starts reaching back to his wallet like he's about to do it. And he's like, wait, why? And I said, well, I'm going to take every single card front and back out. I'm going to take photos of the front and back, and I'm going to put them on my Twitter feed. I've got 30, 40,000 followers or something. And I'm going to tell him that this guy doesn't believe anything bad can happen to him or his family if I do this. And he put his hand back out of his pocket. And he's like, he kind of like tried to change the subject a little bit. I'm like, no. You do have things to hide. You have many things. And it might just be something as simple as wanting to protect, you know, your children or something, right? It could not even be you, which I don't at all believe. But a broader point, let's say I do get malware on my machine. Well, they might not be after me, but they might be after, let's say, someone I care about who's underage in the household. And so even if you don't believe that you have anything to hide in that traditional sense, you certainly need to have some level of protection. And this is just drives me crazy when people don't take ownership over their own security and privacy. Yeah. I think this is a really good example, this Sextortion thing, where it's like, well, you know, they may not be after me, but they could easily be after the person right next to me.
Right.
So, yeah, that very much
I find that I have several friends who are in their late 70s and early 80s, and they seem to be targeted more than anybody by these people.
How does that end up?
Well, they're the people that I know are single, either by divorce or by death, and they prey on them as Lonely Hearts Clubs, and I've seen some of them fall victim to it. A young girl gets on and says, I want to be your friend, and if you're a lonely guy at that age, yeah, I need a friend. I'd love somebody to talk to. So they get in and they start talking. Oh, well, I need some gas money. Can you send me gas money? Or I need this, and can you give me your credit card so I can do this? And they're drained.
I have some very good friends who more or less started the internet, and they have some weird thoughts about how things have ended up. Like I feel personally responsible for how things have become. Like, it wasn't supposed to be this. Like this was supposed to be a way for us to, share information, and now it's just turned into this morass.
It's like anything else. Everything that starts
Dual
good,
use.
everything that starts good has people that are willing to exploit it.
All right. So self-porn. This one I'm a little more on the fence about. You know, some 12-year-old boy wants to send some pics to his, you know, female friend who's approximately the same age. I have a hard time thinking that that kid should go to jail or that the girl receiving it should go to jail or whatever, no matter how many photos they send to one another. That, obviously, I don't want them to have sex. I mean, I don't think they're ready for it, but I don't feel like that should be a crime personally. What is your feeling?
Yeah, once again, that's where parenting has to come in.
Yeah.
I don't think it should be a crime.
It shouldn't be a crime, but parents should step in and see what their kids are doing.
Most states, it's not. You know, back in the day, we used to get the cases where, just what you said, you know, and primarily it was the girls' parents that were more fired up. You know, well, he's got pictures of my 14-year-old girl. And we would tell them, like, hey, I can arrest him for possession of child pornography. I can arrest her for manufacturing child pornography. You know, then all of a sudden they don't want it. But that's days of old, right?
Sure.
And no, I agree. It does go back to parenting. It goes back to, for me, I would be getting Child Protective Services involved. Why are you doing this? Were you sexually abused and now you're acting out? You know, we just never know. But I'm there with you on that. I think there's got to be a line.
Okay, so this falls into the next thing where kids these days, and myself and every security person I know, uses ephemeral messaging. They use it on Signal, they use it on Wicker, they use it on Snapchat. I mean, ephemeral messaging is just the wave of communication in the future. I think everybody has now sort of agreed that it's just better. Obviously makes your job way worse. It is much, much harder when the material just disappears after a day. You know, just don't unlock your phone for a day while you're in custody, you know, and then it's all just gone. So I think that there's something to be said about people being able to have private communications. I think there's something very, very important about that. Back to this, you know, I don't think laws should be completely set in stone because I think there are some bad laws out there, really bad laws, like, you know, for instance, prohibition was a very bad law, and a lot of people went to jail. A lot of the mob more or less came out of it. It was a very bad idea. We need laws to be able to be changed, and we need people to be able to protest and be able to do illegal things under those bad laws in order to get them overturned, or at least be able to talk about it privately, you know, no thought police. Also, I totally understand why that would make your life a living hell when you know it's there. You know that they're involved, but you just don't have the evidence.
Yes, I think we can still develop the evidence, though, right? So I've yet to see somebody that I've arrested for CSAM material who didn't possess. You know, I may not get the messages. There may be plenty of disappearing and all that. They're doing something to keep that, right? So
is it a trophy? Is it
absolutely, yeah. It's a collection. So you absolutely come across that. So again, I may not be able to do everything I would like to do, but I also, you know, we can skin the cat a different way.
I tend to be more of a privacy absolutist because I know how bad governments can get. And the day that the government decides that they want to come after whatever random group of people they don't like, that's the day we're all going to go, I'm really glad I had ephemeral messaging.
Yeah.
So to that point, we were talking a little bit about Facebook earlier in the show. Facebook has a algorithm. It's based off of, I believe, Microsoft's software that they have, Photo DNA, if memory serves. I'm pretty sure that's right. That basically just does like fuzzy matching. It says it's approximately child pornography. You know, maybe pixel width a little different, you know, different color or whatever, but it's the same thing. And as you said, they report the vast majority of all of these cases. In that sense, it makes a lot of sense that they're able to see this material. It makes sense that they can watch The Wire and see this messaging going on. I just see that as ultimately what's going to end up happening is everyone will just leave Facebook. As soon as that gets socialized amongst these people, they'll just go, okay, we'll go somewhere else. We'll go to ephemeral messaging, like Snapchat, for example.
It's happening.
It is happening. It already is happening. The other one that's along those same lines, Apple has software. They call it neural hash. Same thing. If you have photos on your phone and you upload it to iCloud, it's approximately along that path, it's actually on your phone, but in the process of uploading that material to iCloud, they basically say, hey, this person has some amount of things that match. Not just one, that's probably just an anomaly, but when it gets to 50 or 100, you know this is your collection thing you're talking about, then flag this person, flag this individual, and they know exactly who you are and where you're located and all these things because they have iCloud connected. Problem I have with that is now you've just told people don't back up their phones, don't, protect their data or whatever, because the problem is neural hash and photo DNA could easily be weaponized by a government to say, well, find anybody who protested for this cause, or find anybody who attended this set of conferences or whatever. Like, it's very easy to turn this very benign, and I agree with you probably both, good cause into something awful, like really very easily. A guy like me could very easily turn that into a weapon.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Would you be doing more of this stuff, less of it? I mean, I feel like government should have their hands nowhere near anything like this technology, but also I totally get why they want it.
Obviously I feel like we should, but I'm all about privacy too. I don't want, federal government in my inbox.
Mm-hmm.
But when it's specific to this, I think it's a good thing. We can always say that in the United States things could be weaponized. My hope is that as long as somebody's trying to do that, there's plenty to counter it. I don't know what that looks like, beyond this particular topic. Same thing with anti-terrorism.
I don't need to talk about regime changes. But at minimum, okay, let's take regime change off the table, although I don't think that's off the table. Let's just say a company gets acquired. So Grindr, for instance, they got acquired by a Chinese company. So now, millions of American men who are homosexual have all of their information owned by the Chinese military. Mm-hmm. It's a national security threat.
And if you don't think they're not going to use that against us,
oh, of course.
It's
absolutely.
That's why they're buying it.
Of course. So we don't have to talk about internal issues. We can just talk about normal M&A activity that a company might decide, hey, well, and companies have a very dangerous way of thinking about things, like Dropbox, for instance. I do think that they're starting to do this type of analysis as well, if memory serves. But they, at one point, were like, we don't want to be able to look inside at people's Dropbox. There's really no reason for that. Like, just give them a certificate on their phones or whatever. It's all encrypted between them. And if they want to make it unencrypted to communicate out, that's up to them. So the technology exists for them to support that today. But the marketing team said, yes, but what if one day we want to be able to look inside these messages? What if we want to be able to market to these people? And that's a very slippery.
That crosses a line to me.
Oh, of course it does. I mean, it should infuriate anybody who thinks about that.
Yes.
But, I mean, that's the problem with this dual-use technology. As soon as you say, oh, it's just for looking at child pornography, it never is just that. It's always then 5 other things.
It's like you said, everything gets created, and it's created for a good cause. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, it's created for a good cause. Mm-hmm. And once the bad actors get a hold of what's being used for a good cause, then they will find a way to destroy that.
It's very concerning to me, and I don't see enough people talking about this as the consequence of this. Like, Obama was in town, and he was talking about backdoors and encryption, and I think he was expecting a rousing applause at that part of his presentation in 2006, I think it was. It did not go over well, and I think people just don't want the government looking at their stuff, whether it's child pornography or not. I mean, it doesn't matter what we're really talking about because of these regime changes or... Like, I don't care what political side you're on. Imagine the other side had that data and wanted to do something with it. Where you feel comfortable with that?
No.
Doesn't make me feel good. Okay. I think we beat that one to death.
Yeah.
So how is child pornography cases and sexual slavery or trafficking prioritized these days? Is that Is that top of the list, kind of low? Like how much funding are you getting? Like how are you being treated in the department?
Yeah, I think I'm blessed. My department's, I can walk in.
His sheriff supports him 100%.
Yeah, I can walk in today and say, hey, I need to go to L.A. And he's like, why are you standing in front of me then? You know, so we're an anomaly. I think it's high priority. I think it's high priority for the wrong reasons. And with most law enforcement agencies, I think it's high priority because it gets clicks and likes and shares and comments. As evident by the fact that we're arresting the wrong people, simply for likes, clicks, shares, and comments.
It inflates those numbers.
It inflates the numbers. It makes things look great. You know, you again look at there's a yearly Operation Rebuild and Reclaim statewide in California. Just look at the mugshots. So I think there's very good officers, you know, out there that are really busting it, trying to do the right thing. But I think generally the bean counters are to blame for that. You know, and the government throws money at problems. Right? I actually lost federal funding because I was too high functioning, is what I was told. Right? That's the most federal government excuse I've ever heard in my life. We got to give it to somebody who's not doing a good job. Right? It makes a lot of sense. But you know, the state's been wonderful to us. You know, we're funded through the state of Texas by the Office of the Governor, the child sex trafficking team. It just we could go on all day about that and whatever. I do think it is much higher priority law enforcement wide than it was 10 years ago. But I also think that in many ways it's high priority for, again, the right
How about
reasons.
federally? Are you getting a sense of how they're prioritizing things?
So it's really interesting. Yeah, there's high priority on the federal level. Federal agencies are not very good at human trafficking investigations. You know, I mean, that just is what it is. They're not designed for it, right? They're not set up that way.
It seems like they'd be perfect because they're dealing with literal cross borders of all kinds.
Yeah, but you're also dealing at the very, very macro level with state laws that they can't really enforce. So the underlying offense for anything is the prostitution. We just don't arrest for prostitution. We then target the promoter or the trafficker or whatever. You also got to remember, too, everything with the federal government gets clunky. It's clunky as can be. We do operations literally with 2 to 4 people. That's it. We do a full-on human trafficking operation, 2 to 4 people. You walk into a federal trafficking operation, state-level trafficking operation, you're going to have 60 people here. 55 of them.
Half of them don't know what they're doing.
Yeah. So go ahead.
I will say, and you are to be commended on the highest level because you have taken the awareness to a new level, and the job you have done is outstanding. There's Tim Tebow has helped quite a bit in that level, but I think Joe has created more chatter and more good than any one human being in this country.
That's high praise coming from you.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Do you feel like it's earned?
Yeah, you know.
Have you lived up to the hype?
No.
He has lived.
I think, you know, here's the thing. I learned years ago, and I ruffle feathers, but what I tell people is as long as we are not calling it out, we are as guilty as a trafficker. I was in a meeting one time with Andrea Sparks and some other high-level administrators, and they were talking and patting everybody on the back about this particular operation. And I called out very bluntly, everybody who clicks like, everybody who shares this, everybody who did anything like this and continues to make this acceptable, you're as guilty as the person that is trafficking. You are criminalizing these people. And, you know, it just needs to be said sometimes. And accountability is such a huge deal for me that I think I don't care. You know, I don't care if I make friends in law enforcement. So, you know, it's the way I look at it, that person is being victimized. And if you're truly here as a public servant, re-victimizing and celebrating re-victimization is doing nobody any good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I personally love people who ruffle people's feathers, so I'm all about it. Basically, every single person who's sat in these chairs with who's been before you ruffled people's feathers. So
it's a good time,
you're
right?
You're in good company. Absolutely. So, at EHAP, we had this kind of weird rule because Penn kind of mentioned earlier, at some point you're like, there's a 12-year-old, but is she 18? You know, in pigtails, I can't really tell. So we just had a standard rule that if it looks like even a teenager, just drop it, because we can't know for sure. We just went after stuff we knew for sure. So, 12 and under kind of thing. Do you have a different prioritization depending on age, or is it just whatever comes across your desk?
It's whatever comes across my desk, right? So I always ask people. I was contacted by the FBI yesterday, actually, and they wanted to do an operation to recover minors. And I told them, I said, this is why the FBI fails miserably at recovering minors, because you're looking for minors. My question becomes then, when we look at children, and I'm not saying we should not be going to find children. I'm 100% for that. But let's take a 17-year-old and an 18-year-old. Why is one life more valuable than the other? Mm-hmm. Let's take a 16-year-old and a 55-year-old. We'll take a 16-year-old, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, Christian, Caucasian female, and a 55-year-old Asian female who's, say, in this country, undocumented. Why is one life more important than the other? Mm-hmm. So as it comes, we're doing our job, and are we out looking for kids? Absolutely. But are we out looking for adults too? Absolutely. So I think you can't, if you focus so much and so narrowly on one, you're going to miss the big picture. And that's what a
lot will get swept under the rug.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's what nobody in the sex trafficking world is going to post an ad that says, hey, I have a 16-year-old, right? That would be crazy.
Right.
But if you're not looking at the 19-year-old, you're never going to find the 16-year-old. So
I think that's probably my biggest takeaway is how much the over 18 crowd or 18 plus crowd drives this entire industry as well. I mean, it's an enormous part of this industry, probably the lion's share, as a matter of fact.
Absolutely. Yeah.
In your, Joe, in your massage parlor bust, were there many underage girls?
No, I've never seen one ever. I've never seen an underage person in an illicit massage parlor. And I always tell people, you're not going to find one. You're just not. Mm-hmm. Where we have seen them is in Latin-based, where you'll find juveniles. They're typically younger. But even generally then, they're still adults. But that is where we have seen the potential for some minors.
Sure. Are the majority of your bust Asian-oriented?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There for a while, Korean organized crime was really big in the IMBs, and it's all shifted to predominantly Chinese-based.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. And these are Chinese citizens or American citizens?
Generally, what we're finding is either permanent residents. You find some overstays, so they come on a tourist visa, and they'll just overstay. The overwhelming majority in this day and age are seeking political asylum. So they'll come on a visa. They'll go straight to an immigration attorney, seek political asylum, and for years they're
in the system.
They're in the system. Yeah, they're here. It doesn't grant work or anything like that, but overwhelming majority are seeking political asylum.
Got it. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you for doing this. Where can people get a hold of you if they find stuff that they probably shouldn't be looking at? Yeah. How do they get in touch with you guys?
Don't go digging. For me, it's you can go straight to the McLennan County Sheriff's Office website. There's a section under there for human trafficking. There's an anonymous tip reporting deal there, and it's completely anonymous.
And what if they don't live in Texas? What if they're broader, outside the United States even?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn, have a public Facebook page as well. So either or, super easy to find me. You Google my name, it'll pop up.
Okay.
I'm on LinkedIn, and then in my book it will have an email address to reach me.
And I'm assuming there's some hotlines or some websites out there that people can read up on this some more. Do you have anything that stands out as being a particularly good resource?
Blue is a great site that the government operates, and very educational.
Yeah, it's under the there's a couple. So under the Homeland Security Blue campaign is a really good one for anti-trafficking. Polaris, the National Human Trafficking Hotline is obviously something I would encourage people. There's a training series called Net Smarts on the National Center for Missing Exploited Children's website that is really age-appropriate information for kids with internet safety, things like that. In this movement, I tell people to use caution more than just finding things. As much as I hate to say this, and I'm a veteran, many veteran-based organizations are absolute garbage. I don't know why that is. I've got my suspicions, but I generally tend to avoid those type organizations and anti-trafficking movement. So I would always say, I don't care what organization it is, do your research. Research where the information is coming from. Not just because they say it, where is the cited source of the information, and evaluate that. And more often than not, you would find it's not very good.
And I would highly encourage your listing base to give money to the charities that are helping the victims.
Such as, do you have anything?
The Austin 20, Nicole's Place, Collective Liberty, the Lighthouse. Joe knows a bunch of them.
Unbound Global's a phenomenal one. Traffic 911, wonderful. The Refuge in Houston, phenomenal. There's a ton of good organizations out there. My only point to what I said is just do your research.
Got it.
Yeah, do your homework.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Penn, Joe, this has been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert.